This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Nam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we've got a fantastic show today. We have a lot to cover. In fact, we're not even going to be able to talk about all the things that we need to talk about, whether it's Omicron or the other kind of other things that we're facing kind of globally right now, because there's so many other things to talk about, including the sanctioning and the support of bigotry, hatred, and Islamophobia in the U.S. Senate. We're going to be talking with Arab Talk correspondent Phil Pasquini in D.C., who's going to be giving us an update about the Lauren Boebert hate campaign, bigoted campaign, Islamophobic campaign. And the thing that we'll talk about, which is really kind of concerning and really frightening to me, is the support that she's getting. I mean, yes, there are some people speaking out, but overwhelmingly she's being supported for her bigoted, hateful, and Islamophobic comments. And we'll also, along those lines, we're going to be talking about one of her bigger supporters, Chris Christie, who's going to be running for president. He tried to distance himself from the Trump campaign, but is fully embracing the Islamophobic approach.
Exactly.
We're going to talk a little bit about something that is unbelievable to me, Jamal, which is the fact that an apartheid state is going to host the Miss Universe pageant. We're going to talk about...
We have whitewashing and pinkwashing, and so this is what? Beauty washing?
Beauty washing, and we're going to talk about the calls to boycott the Miss Universe pageant, which is scheduled to be hosted by an apartheid regime. And then finally, depending on we have time, we're going to talk about what's happening on the ground in Palestine, obviously, because illegal colonial settlers are in the process of taking away Palestinian farming land, starting farms on stolen Palestinian land as a further extension of the ethnic cleansing and land theft that goes on there. So we have a lot to talk about today, but I think we should talk about Lauren Boebert, the congresswoman who is just spewing such hateful rhetoric against Ilhan Omar, the representative from the great state of Minnesota.
Well, let's go to Phil Pasquini. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar played a harrowing death threat left recently on her voicemail as she implored House Republican leaders to do more to tamp down anti-Muslim hatred in their ranks and hold those who perpetuate it accountable. The Democratic Minnesota representative, one of only a handful of Muslim members of Congress, has been the subject of repeated attacks by conservative pundits and some Republicans in Congress, which she says have led to an increase in the number of death threats she receives. Recently, a video of the first-term Colorado representative Lauren Boebert calling Omar a member of the jihad squad and likening her to a bomb-carrying terrorist went viral. Joining us to discuss this and more, Arab Talk reporter in Washington, D.C., Phil Pasquini. Phil is the author of Domes, Arches, and Minarets, A History of Islamic-Inspired Buildings in America. Welcome again to Arab Talk, Phil.
Great, thank you, Jamal. It's good to be here.
So when a sitting member of Congress calls a Muslim colleague a member of the jihad squad and insinuates that she'll blow up basically the U.S. Capitol, what do you make of it?
I'm disgusted. Doesn't she have better things to do than to take a chapter out of the Trump playbook to start vilifying people and assassinating personalities instead of doing her job and representing her constituents? Obviously, she thinks this is going to resonate with them. And I think she's like a lot of people who are small-minded in the same way. They want to ingratiate and grandeur themselves by putting somebody else down. And this is just another cheap shot at making herself, getting free publicity, if you will, The story's all over the world. Everybody's talking about it, and so on. Unfortunately, a lot of people probably think she's correct. You can remember a few years ago when the then police chief in San Francisco made his comments about if there was a bombing in San Francisco, it'd come from the Yemeni community. Right. Same kind of rhetoric, same kind of stupid thinking, just very disgusting to me. I would hope that she has done better things, but I'm willing to bet that if you looked at her congressional record and what she's achieved while she's been in office, it's probably pretty thin. She hasn't got much to toot her horn about, evidently. So take a cheap shot at other people.
You spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., and we actually have spoken a lot during the 4 years of Donald Trump. And then you mentioned something very important. He said, I mean, what she's saying, she's taking a chapter out of Trump's book. But, I mean, here we are, we're in a whole different administration, and yet, you have a lot of people still looking towards the comeback or the return of the Trump Messiah, if I want to say that, because this is how they kind of look at him with admiration. I mean, did the 40 years of Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. normalize white supremacy and Islamophobia, in your opinion?
Yeah, I believe that's the case. I mean, I said initially when he started running and he looked like it was going to be a viable candidate, that the Democrats should have circled the wagons and not let him carry the agenda. And he started out with immigration and immigrants. And as soon as he did, they were flustered. They didn't know what to do. And I've watched this now for 4 years, starting with the first riot in Lafayette Park right after or just before the election, when you had white supremacists versus Antifa, and then going to rallies like the Million Man March for Trump 2020, and everybody shaking pumping their fists, yelling USA, USA. We see that again and again. Reminded me of scenes out of 1939 when people were yelling Heil Hitler. Had that same crowd, messianic kind of message of what should have been a political party ends up being a personality cult. And watching this evolve in this past year, I can't tell you. I think both my wife and I have done 172 stories this year, which is about twice what we normally do in a normal year, starting with January 6th, watching this insurrection go down, and then the futile attempts on 3 occasions now of trying to reinstill him as a president because he had a stolen election. And so that all plays into this normalization of Islamophobia, fake news, and all the rest. I hate to even go down the laundry list because it's so boring and mundane, but it's a significant factor that we're going to have to live with because Trump did normalize this kind of rhetoric, or we wouldn't be seeing it repeated over and over again.
I mean, how far are we from translating this rhetoric to a real, basically, threat? I should have mentioned that Representative Omar played a voicemail laden with profanity, racial epithet, and threat to take you off the face of this effing earth. This is the voicemail, which she said was among hundreds of such messages she has reported since joining Congress. She said that this voicemail was left for her after Boebert released another video on Monday criticizing her. So we've listened to the rhetoric, we've seen them marching. Are we going to wait until something terrible is going to happen? I mean, is this what this current Congress or leadership in the GOP in Congress is waiting to see? What's the threshold really from accepting even, let's say, free speech, which many people find hateful and repulsive, to translating that into danger?
Well, in my mind, and I think legally speaking, I'm not a lawyer, but when you threaten somebody, you've transcended free speech. You now have entered into a terrorist threat. That's not free speech any longer. It's like the old anachronism of yelling fire in a crowded theater. You have the right to speak, but there are things that you just can't say that are not acceptable and that will be prosecuted under the law. I don't think that we have escaped from January 6th. That's very much alive today. And I know that there are people in government who are preparing for the reemergence of Trump, if should he get reelected, and looking at these continual threats. I think it was a month ago in Washington, they started locking stuff down. I walked by the White House. There wasn't a single uniformed Secret Service person on duty that didn't have a fully automatic weapon. So the threat level had been raised within a couple of days. There was some rumbling in the background, and they geared up for that. So, we're not out of the woods yet. And anybody that doesn't condemn this kind of stuff, and you're talking about the GOP, and I agree with you, they're not doing anything to counter this. They're not doing anything to hold people accountable for this kind of stuff. And they're complicit in whatever happens. And I don't think...
they're not. And I should add, I don't know if you've seen this interview, but just like a day ago on CNN with Wolf Blitzer, he had the former governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, to talk about this incident. And he was making light of it. He said, well, she said it she was joking.
Big joke. Yeah, but if the joke was on him, it would be a different story. But when the joke is on somebody else, that's always acceptable.
I don't know his exact words, but he said, she laughed and the audience laughed.
Yeah, that makes it a joke, I guess. So she's a stand-up comedian and not a congressman. She is a predator. She's unprofessional. She's unfit for the job, obviously. And I have to ask the question, why, when she's making a talk like this to her constituents, they don't stop her and ask her, what are you really doing in Washington? What legislation have you brought to the fore? How are you representing us? Trump did the same thing. He did not run on issues when he first ran. He ran on all this ancillary stuff, which is what every dictator has ever done. You have a problem, you drop the subject and switch into something that's emotional so that you can deviate away from what is substantive into these areas that have what difference does it make? This is supposed to be the melting pot. In my book, I talked about that. I go back to 1776. Before 1776, and we became a nation, there were Muslims living in North America, something these people have no idea or don't know anything about. And so, to look at Islam and Muslims as some kind of a new phenomena and a threat, that's not the case. Historically, it's not the case. What about this kid yesterday that killed, shot 4 people in a high school? There's terrorism for it. That's what we need to guard ourselves against. And this is the kind of stuff that she's doing, which causes more people who are on the fringe to step into the rain. Here's the congressman saying, she should be, annihilated or whatever. She's a terrorist. That's just going to make the mental midgets among us even more emotional about what and how they will react to things. When Elaine and I were in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh a number of years ago, and we heard some noise, so we went towards it. And there was a rally, it was a Tea Party rally with people dressed up like the founding fathers, holding signs saying, "No jihad in America. Islam will not take over the U.S. We will maintain America for Americans," meaning white Americans, of course. So this mentality is always there. It was the Irish, it was the Italians, it was the Chinese, it was the Japanese. Now it's the Muslims, it was Latinos. Unfortunately, this kind of stuff grows and it gains a following that's emotional, certainly not predicated on true fact. And I know she apologized for her statements that she made about Ilhan.
She apologized and later on she walked it back. But anyway.
Right. It was a phony apology to begin with, of course. That's just part of the playbook, But the damage has been done. You let the bird out of the cage, you might want it back, but it's long gone, unfortunately.
I'm glad you actually mentioned your book, Domes, Arches, and Minarets. And this is something that you've worked on for many, many years. And then you started by talking about that there was Islam, and which many people don't know, that the first Muslims came into America as slaves. So, way before many of the immigrants from Europe who came here mostly after the turn of the century and so forth. And a lot of people don't know about it, but in your book, you've highlighted how many buildings I forgot the number. Please remind me. I'm
sure. more than 250. I've probably found 300 by now.
That all have Islamic architecture from this, the domes and the structures and what have you, and a lot of people actually don't know that. They just look at it and they don't know what's the origin of this. And then here is something, I don't know, I want your reaction to, this is according to a new Pew Research Center poll. And it states that even though many Americans have negative views toward Muslims or Islam, 53% say they don't know anyone who is Muslim.
Yeah.
In addition, 52% say that they don't know much or anything about Islam. Americans who know Muslims are more likely to view them in a positive light. But here you go. It's kind of like they don't know and they don't care to find out, but they're ready to condemn.
Right. Well, I refer to these things as the hula hoop. When I was a kid, all of a sudden, every kid on the block had a hula hoop. I never even heard of it. It came out of nowhere. Everybody had to have one. It went along for a while, and something else came up, trampolines or whatever. It's the same kind of thing. Those statistics that you're quoting were used many years ago when I was young during the civil rights movement. How many people actually had a black friend or knew a black family or worked with a black person, but socialized with them outside of the working environment? The numbers were similar. Most people didn't know anybody that was black. They certainly didn't fraternize with them. And so you see the same thing. It's suspicion by not becoming friendly or knowing somebody, who they are and what they are. And so, it's not surprising that people hate Muslims because they don't know them, because they don't know what they're even hating. I mean, they're following a group. It's like I covered somebody at the White House. It was gang stalkers, gang stalking kind of attitude. One person does it, a bunch of people jump on it. Pretty soon, it's the thing to do. What has this got to do with anything? People are individuals. They're not collective. Muslims are not all Muslims. They have the same religion, but Muslims are found throughout the world. I mean, I met a guy one time who's a Jewish Eskimo. There's a rare thing for you, but not unheard of. And so by not knowing people or associating with them, people become suspicious and withdrawn. And we see that. I mean, one of the great things that happened was integration of neighborhoods, because when people lived in ethnic concentrated areas, they had no interaction with anyone else. So they were suspicious of anybody. We just saw that play out in South Carolina, where this kid jogging through a neighborhood gets killed because he's supposedly a thief. He was black. That was his crime, and he was in a white neighborhood. And so it's the same stupid mentality over and over and over of suspecting people of actions which they haven't participated in or a part of. And really, this woman, a senator, congressman, she's doing more to upset the balance for domestic terrorism than anybody else. They point fingers at Muslims, looking at an exterior threat, when the threat really exists right here among us on a daily basis, with people like this running around making these phony proclamations.
I mean, you covered the insurrection. You were there in Washington, D.C. It looks like they assume that people have short-term memory and have forgotten about all these people storming the state capitol. I mean, they were the real terrorists.
Exactly.
I mean, that's probably the biggest danger that we've witnessed in this country for many years.
I kind of, in my mind, I always go back to the election of George W. Bush the first time, when he was selected and not elected. We can remember what occurred. And
elected
they got away.
With a hanging Chad.
Yeah, hanging Chad. And they got away with it. And I think that opened the floodgate to telling people who want to control things that people don't really pay any attention to what's going on. They're really not interested. They have other things to do. Obviously, we're all guilty of that. We have our lives, and so on. But I think that set the framework for reference that we see being manifest now, in the sense that, there was this insurrection, and then we get the continual lies of, oh, it's just tourists going to the Capitol just to look at the building, and so on and so on. When you see people running into the building that are geared up for a SWAT confrontation, they are not tourists walking into a building. And by not condemning that in the strongest of terms, and arguing about minutia, about whether it was or it wasn't, does a disservice to everybody, and it sets the stage for future action. There's going to be more of this in the future. It's going to get tougher to live in our democracy as time goes on. Then they called it, well, it was a demonstration. You have the right to peacefully demonstrate, but you don't have the right to just take over a building because it's the people's building. It doesn't belong to you. We all pay for the military, and we pay for battleships. When was the last time you went down to a battleship and they let you on board, took you on a cruise? It's the same kind of thing. We pay into it. We're responsible for it. When we try to destroy it, there should be it doesn't even enter the realm of partisan politics. It's wrong. It's bad, and it should be condemned and dealt with. And we see these games.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of expect in a big country like this, you're going to find pockets of racists, Islamophobes, anti-Semites all over.
Right.
But Washington, D.C. sets the tone. This is the seat of the government, of all the branches of the government. How divided do you feel now is Washington, D.C.?
Well, there's the city of Washington, D.C., which is where people live, which never comes into conversation because the catch-all phrase of Washington, D.C. is focused on government. So there's the government, there's the city. The city is very diverse. The government is somewhat diverse as well. The difference between the two is that, as you mentioned, this melting pot, which doesn't melt together but separates somehow into these enclaves of ideas, the government is reflective of who the people are around the country. I mean, if you look at legislators from different sectors, different states, you find them mimicking somewhat what's going on. But the reality is that they are reflective of their own agendas to try to get reelected. And they spend most of their time engaged in that. So like in this case with this woman, she wants to be reelected. She wants the name recognition. So the more noise she makes negatively, that plays into her means of, in her mind at any rate, I guess, getting free PR. What I see in Washington is not so much a division among people, but division. I mean, politics has become divisive. It used to be politics was the art of compromise, that you would come to a deal and knowing that you're going to have to give something up in order to get something. So you had your priorities. What do you want to give up? What do you really have to hold out for? And how are you going to get there? We saw that with the infrastructure bill that just went in. I saw people who were on the left, the far left, not going to give an inch. If they didn't get everything they wanted, they were not voting. People in the middle were saying, hey, let's compromise. We'll give this up. We'll get that. People on the right, they didn't want to give anything either. You can't run a government that's polarized. You have to have the understanding that you're going to do something based on mutual agreements. This is the era that we're in now. The polarization has become so strong that people do things for their party rather than for what's good for the country. We've got two holdouts, as you know, from Colorado and West Virginia, who act more like Republicans than Democrats. And then we've got Bernie, who's an independent, who's more of a Democrat than an independent. And so you have this mishmash of ideas and philosophies and ways of dealing with things. It's all counterproductive at this point. It's too polarized. It's too encamped. We need to get back to statesmanship, legislators who are willing to compromise in order to move forward. If we don't do that, we're going to end up in this quagmire of indecisiveness, of fighting and bickering. And this kind of stuff is going to take over in the end. They keep talking about civil war when I'm at these rallies. We need the revolution. We want the civil war. This is not the way we should be thinking and dealing with things,
Who wants a civil war? I mean,
I certainly
I mean,
don't.
if they've read the history of the U.S. Civil War, it was a very
Pretty
bloody
bleak.
history.
Yeah,
very bleak. So I don't know who wishes that. I mean, that's kind of the craziest thing to say.
I see these people at rallies, and the rhetoric is frightening. I mean, I saw a guy recently. I photographed him, had a T-shirt on. He said, CNN and fake news, don't believe what you see on TV. I'm sure he watches Fox television. So why does he believe anything he sees on TV?
Well, I wanted to put on, as the late Johnny Carson would say, your Karnak hat, right? Karnak the magician, I think he called him. Is that it? Yeah, hat. And it's not too far. Next year is going to be the midterm elections. 2 years from that, and even earlier, it doesn't take,
Right.
You're 3 years in the presidential term that you're already preparing for another election. Where are we heading?
Boy, that is a magician hat. If we keep going the way we're going right now, it's going to get a lot worse.
I mean, Michael, Jess keeps saying Trump is coming back. I'm worried that Trump is coming back. I mean, how true is this?
It's a distinct possibility. I mean, if the Democrats don't get their act together really strongly and start making what we were just talking about, compromises. And, that's the profound difference that I see right now between the Democrats and Republicans. The Republicans will go down with the ship. They don't care what it is. They'll go down with the ship. Democrats are all over the place. They can't agree on being a party. They all want to hold out for their own best interests and their camp. We cannot survive. A Democratic Party can't survive in an environment where it's fragmented. It has to pull together. It has to give things up to have an overview. And that's why the Republicans are strong. They have a strong personality, whether you like him or not. And I certainly don't care for his style or his rhetoric, but he's a force to be reckoned with. And that's a reality. We have to deal with that. So my own take on it is we're not going to be in a good place as we move forward. I mean, there are just too many problems that are exacerbating each other. Look at gun control. There's an issue that's at the forefront again, another school shooting. When are we going to get to the point? Well, I'll back up. We are going to get to the point where it's going to become so bad that, the government is going to try to start taking people's guns away from them. The same way they're going to mandate getting vaccines, in my mind. If things get really bad, you're not going to have a choice anymore. We put a seatbelt on when we get in a car because we know that in terms of safety, our odds of surviving in a crash are much better than not. And so, people don't like big government, but then sometimes they don't give anybody a choice in anything. And big government has to step in for whatever purposes to guide the country along a positive path.
Well, here what makes a good holiday gift: domes, arches, and minarets, a history of Islamic-inspired buildings in America. It's available on your website. It's
Amazon. Yeah, Amazon.
And Amazon. So I urge everyone to pick up a copy. And this, like I said, it's a great gift. Phil, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
My pleasure. I hope that we can meet and talk about some positive, good things in the new year. So
hopefully,
let's look forward to it.
That's the voice and the face of Phil Pasquini, Arab Talk correspondent. Well, he kind of nails it, Jamal. And I think given the current political landscape that we're in, Lauren Boebert feels and has done her, well, I'll say two things. She feels from a political calculus point of view that she can continue to target hateful Islamophobic vitriol against Ilhan Omar and against the squad. She feels like politically that makes sense to her. But I also believe she truly believes her hateful rhetoric against Muslim women, against... And her apology, Jamal, was so painfully weak. She didn't have the the courage or the dignity to apologize to Ilhan Omar directly. She apologized to anybody in the Muslim community that was offended by her comments. Well, here's breaking news, Jamal. Everybody was offended by her comments in the Muslim community. Every person with a soul, with a heart, with any kind of feeling was offended by her comments. And when you apologize, Jamal, you apologize to a person that you offended. She's yet to do that.
Absolutely right. And this is the thing, Jess. What's happening now, and of course, this is on the GOP. The GOP leadership has not apologized. The GOP leadership has not put pressure on her to really, or they haven't censored her or reprimanded her. Instead, they're making up excuses. And this is the excuse, and we'll talk about Chris Christie's interview on CNN with Wolf Blitzer. And that's basically the official line that they've been taking, which is to say, well, Ilhan Omar in the past, actually, which is wrong, made some anti-Semitic remarks. And then two, that she does not support Israel, and she voted against the recent missile sale to Israel. And so they're conflating her criticism of Israel and lack of support to a foreign state with anti-Semitism and also like tit for tat. If she can do that, then Boebert can attack her. But then Boebert's not attacking her; she's attacking 1.8 billion Muslims across the universe. So that's and just like quickly, but then when Ilhan Omar spoke and she was allegedly accused of anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic trope, the entire Democratic leadership went after her.
They did,
and
including Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, yes,
to unequivocally apologize, and she did. She did apologize. That's one thing. Her lack of support of Israel, or lack of support to any country for that matter, that's her business. That has nothing to do with basically being an anti-Semite or being a racist or an Islamophobe, but they're trying to kind of equate the two.
That's right, Jamal. And that's right. And here's the problem with that argument. They're basically saying, if you criticize an apartheid state, then we have free rein to give hateful vitriol, bigoted comments that are certain to inspire, attacks against Ilhan Omar, either verbally or even physically. I mean, she has a 24/7 security detail because of these hateful comments.
Well, just her last press conference, she came out with a tape recorder.
That's right.
And played
a tape.
An example of a message that was less threatening her life, basically.
That's right.
And she says she gets tons of these messages.
Yeah, she does. And the FBI is involved. And Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the minority party in the House of Representatives, has, again, failed in his moral leadership or leadership of any kind to condemn them. He said that he has, and he does this all the time, he said he's spoken to Lauren Boebert privately. And apparently, when this has been reported, and we spoke about this, Boebert had a telephone conversation with Ilhan Omar, and she doubled down. After the conversation, she doubled down on the hateful rhetoric, doubled down on the Islamophobia.
Ilhan Omar hung up on her.
Well, she hung up on her because she in fact refused to apologize and continued to spew this hateful rhetoric. And here we go again, Jamal. If you criticize an apartheid state in this country, you will get attacked viciously and you'll have death threats against you. Criticizing the president of this country, especially if you're a Republican, no problem. Calling for an insurrection against this country and a coup d'etat, no problem. But criticize an apartheid state, and then it's okay to spew hateful, bigoted rhetoric. Jamal, I've said this, we've talked about it. This, to me, portends very, very frightening future for this country in terms of the attacks on democracy, the attacks on women of color, the attacks on communities who are disadvantaged, the attacks on the Muslim community. I'm afraid as we get into 2022, we get into the midterm elections. I've said this, Trump is definitely going to run again. He has a great chance of winning. We are headed for even, you thought 4 years of Trump was dark? You haven't seen darkness in terms of the attacks on civil rights, the attacks on the democratic process, and the attacks on women of color and communities of color. The potential for this to get much worse is great, and we're seeing it in microcosm, Jamal, when we see Lauren Boebert spew this hateful rhetoric against a colleague in the House of Representatives, and not only get away with it, Jamal, but be supported for it.
Well, talking about basically the attack and talking about in fact Trump, but now he's probably is being challenged from within the party, and that I'm taking you to former New Jersey governor and former presidential candidate Chris Christie, because
Right.
I think now he's the face of the party, or at least he's been advanced to go on television to defend Boebert, make excuses for her, and also it looks like he's going to be running. And
He
that's
will
why
run.
I'm saying
Yeah, he
will
is going to run.
And then maybe he'll present a sharper image of the party rather than Donald Trump. But anyway, he went on CNN with Wolf Blitzer, basically defending this Islamophobe, and he Congresswoman Boebert on CNN saying that it's only a joke. She was joking, and people laughed because when she spoke, she kind of like laughed, and then the audience also laughed. So, I guess she's a stand-up comedian. She's not a congresswoman. I mean, this is how he was presenting it. And then he went on the attacking Ilhan Omar, accusing her of anti-Semitism, and that, and then I have to say the only thing that Wolf Blitzer did, he said, listen, we've also held her accountable, and we reported on the story, because he was saying no one is talking about Ilhan Omar when she made those comments, before, and he said that's wrong. She was covered in the media. She was reprimanded by the party, by Nancy Pelosi. She apologized, and that's the difference. But to me also, I saw that his appearance is a litmus test to see if he is going to be viable 3 years from now.
Well, that's exactly right, Jamal. Here's my worry about it. Chris Christie is trying to distance himself from Trump, get some space politically away from Trump and some aspects of the MAGA crowd. Chris Christie wants to appeal to the suburban white women of this country who voted for Joe Biden in the previous election. So let's think about it. If being a hateful Islamophobe puts you further away from Trump, what does that say about the Republican Party right now? That they have to, as their middle ground, support an Islamophobe and a bigot and hateful rhetoric as the middle ground for the Republican Party. I think what this suggests, Jamal, is that the Republican Party is they want their cake and they want to eat it too. They want to be able to distance themselves from Trump, but use the same hateful rhetoric that Trump used and somehow claim that it's distant. I don't see Chris Christie as being that different from Donald Trump, frankly. He wants to convey a softer, less aggressive image. Yet, if you watch that Wolf Blitzer interview, it was frankly pretty frightening and disgusting.
Yeah, well, that's what they're trying to do. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They know they cannot win without the far right within the party, so they have to play to the same tune of Islamophobia, white supremacy, keeping your guns, all these things, but at the same time, they want to come across as being reasonable. Like, I'm Chris Christie, I'm from New Jersey, I was a governor there, I know government. An insider versus Trump, you couldn't, nobody could guess what Trump was going to do next, And so he's an institution man in a way.
Well, of
and that's
course
why
he is.
I think
No, I think that's right.
Someone like him can deliver and get the support of all the people who supported Trump, but then he can deliver to the party elite in Washington, D.C., then he'll be their man. I personally think that the party eventually, that's where probably you and I will differ, that they will eventually get another person to replace Trump.
Yeah, I don't believe it. I'm going to say it, and I'll say it, and I predicted it before. I'm predicting it again. There's greater than a 50-50 chance that Donald Trump will be the next president. Here's breaking news on Arab Talk. I think Chris Christie is actually running for the vice presidency rather than the presidency, because recent comments by Mike Pence have put him at even further distance.
No, Pence is out. He's not going to be. I mean, if Trump runs, we know that. Pence is out.
So I actually think Chris Christie is actually running for vice president. So, we'll see. But either way, both Donald Trump and Chris Christie were getting a sense of the what the Democrats are going to be facing and what the Republican playbook is going to be. Ilhan Omar, the Squad, progressive forces are going to be demonized like they're demonized now. It's going to be an ugly campaign. And I'm sorry to give you some more bad news, Jamal, but if you look at the polling right now, it really looks like that the Democrats are going to get massacred in the midterm elections.
I'll agree with you on.
There's a greater than 50-50 chance that the Democrats will lose the House, will lose the Senate, and will be in the same situation where we'll have this split government, where the Congress will be Republican, the presidency will be held by Joe Biden for 2 more years at least, and nothing will get done again. We're going to be in that same old pattern all over again. It's going to get pretty ugly in 2022, Jamal. And I think we hadn't planned about talking about this today, but if you've been listening to the Supreme Court hearings as well as, I have been lately, and thinking about the challenge to Roe v. Wade, the Mississippi law that wants to basically overturn Roe v. Wade, there is more than a 50-50 chance, too, that Roe v. Wade is going to get overturned. And it will get overturned before the midterm election. So we're seeing what I would call a cataclysmic shift to white supremacy, conservative extremism. And if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, and I actually happen to be one of these people that believes it will get overturned, you're going to see further divisions in this country, further divides, further bloodshed. It's really sad to say that, but we're really in the process of witnessing a resurgence of kind of autocratic rule and anti-democratic processes going on in the United States. What I would say is that Arab Talk listeners and viewers need to get their seatbelts on, because we're going to continue to report on this. And what I see doesn't look too good.
You're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Moving on, Jess, to another topic here.
Beauty washing. Beauty
washing. I've never thought about, you and I will be having a discussion about Miss Universe. Jess, this is not part of our agenda, but
it's not our agenda.
Here we are. So Palestinian civil rights movements in South Africa and all over the world, they were up in arms about Miss South Africa's non-withdrawal from the pending Miss Universe pageant, saying that apartheid Israel is no different from their country's basically historical oppression. And the South African government, which is unusual, has withdrawn its support from its own contestant and has withdrawn its support for the event because, of the plans of the Miss South Africa's plans to participate in Miss Universe 2021 contest, which will be held in Eilat, I think December 12th. So there are a lot of things about this. Several countries, Malaysia, etc., they're not sending contestants there. And then whenever we're getting all these kind of different stories keep popping up, then you have the 2019 Miss Greece, or supposedly Miss Greece, Rafaela Plastira, announced in October that she was pulling out of the contest because she could not go up on stage acting like nothing is happening when people are fighting for their lives. And then she expressed her support to the Palestinians. And then comes the Greek organizers of the event, and they said, she's not our representative, we're sending somebody else.
Yeah.
She shouldn't have spoken about this, because she's not the legitimate representative. Then you have today or yesterday, a contestant tested positive for
the
COVID-19
yeah.
after arriving in Israel, and basically they did not identify this contestant. So a lot of things. And then I was like looking through the media, the Jerusalem Post, of course, we know what the Jerusalem Post represents, and other, they're like going on the defensive, saying that this is not the place to have politics, as if like this has never happened before, like the Olympics
exactly.
weren't barred by politics.
Exactly.
And then when
Jamal,
it comes to moving this contest, which frankly I find it kind of unusual during COVID, and
well, Jamal, the Israelis have barred all travel. So my comment is just like, okay, you've shut down incoming and outgoing flights from the apartheid state, but you're going to allow in a few days people to fly in from all over the world in the middle of an ongoing pandemic and the emergence of a new variant, Omicron, that is potentially 500 times more contagious. I predict yet another disastrous decision on the part of the Israeli apartheid regime, Jamal. They never miss an opportunity to shoot themselves in the foot. They're going to go forward here. They're going to condemn these criticisms, and it will just bring more light, as we know, to the apartheid practices, because there will be some contestants who don't show up, and that'll be the big news. So,
and here's an afterthought. I just actually was thinking about it earlier today. Wasn't Donald Trump involved with Miss Universe?
No, he used to be. He used to be the promoter, and he sold his rights. Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of like funny, that he had his fingers on this event here, and all of a sudden now, during COVID, and at a time when Israel, and we keep repeating this time and time again, has been labeled as an apartheid state by Human Rights Watch and by its own human rights organization, B'Tselem, that they're holding, out of all the countries in the world, they're holding this contest in Israel, despite the calls for boycott. It's like they're going against the current.
Sure, they're doubling down. Well, they're doubling down
some spotlight on there, that this is like a happy country. We're having this Miss Universe contest there, and by the way, we're asking you, the entire world, don't look to your right or to your left, because we don't want you to see all the Palestinian Bantustans that the state has created. We don't want you to see the apartheid wall that surrounds basically the West Bank. We don't want you to see the 1.8 million Palestinians in 24/7 lockdown in Gaza. Just pay attention to these beautiful women in Eilat. and forget about everything around there.
I couldn't say it any better, Jamal. That's exactly right. And we know what white supremacists do when they feel challenged. And this is what the Israelis always do. They double down. Rather than coming clean, rather than confronting the reality of their apartheid oppressive practices, rather than, being held accountable on the international stage, they double down. And speaking of doubling down, this will lead to our final kind of, because we don't have that much time, but I think we should talk about the expansion of the illegal Israeli settler colonial expansion to steal more Palestinian land, and not just any land, stealing farmland that has been, part of Palestinian history for hundreds and hundreds, if not, how many hundreds of years, Jamal. So they're literally getting away with ongoing murder and land theft.
Exactly. And this is happening at the same time. So this is the real news. I mean, to me, to you, probably to the rest of the world, as the world is trying to deal with COVID, Miss Universe is something like irrelevant, with all due respect to people who watch it or support it, because you have bigger fish to fry. And in Palestine, Israeli settlers are gobbling up land, and they are being used, aside from their own atrocities, but they are being used as a tool by the state to grab more land, because they can now work the system. Because if you establish farmland in the West Bank, regardless whether you stole it or you did not, as long as you are Jewish, you get support from the state. You get loans, you get grants, you get aid in the form of infrastructure,
right,
water, and
right,
farm subsidies.
Right. So
I mean, this is what's happening. So these settlers now, they just all that they have to do is grab a piece of land, bring a couple of goats, plant a couple of plants, and say this is farmland, and the state will immediately support them. I'm talking about the state of Israel, and this has been documented by the human rights organization B'Tselem, and they've been highlighting all their attacks basically on Palestinian farmers on a daily basis. In the past several weeks alone, they have established 50 new outposts, because they haven't grown to be like an entire settlement, and you don't need that. But they have established 50 new outposts where in the West Bank, of course, and where they basically are saying that they are using them for sheep, goat, and cattle herding.
Well, only thing we could say, Jamal, it's apartheid it's old wine in new bottles. It's the same apartheid, oppressive occupation practice that the apartheid regime of Israel has engaged in. And you are exactly right. The real story here is land theft and occupation. And, the apartheid regime wants you to look at Eilat, but not look at what's happening in Gaza or the West Bank.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest episodes, and we will talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.